Hello and welcome back to the Gifted Podcast Olympic Special Series. If you're new here, in this special series, we are going to be joined by Olympians of past and present who will be sharing their experience of competing at the Olympics as we learn what it takes to live your life without fear and inhibitions and make your zindagi unlimited. And in that very spirit, this special series is brought to you by Edelweiss Tokyo Life Insurance, which perfectly embodies this very notion of a zindagi unlimited. Today, I'm joined by a true legend in track and field sports in India because he has been to not one, not two, not three, but four Olympics. His name? Vikas Gowda. Vikas is a discus thrower, and other than being a four-time Olympian, he is also a Padma Shri awardee and a national record holder. Vikas and I chat about what it takes to qualify for and compete at four Olympics and how he approached each of the summer games. We also discuss Kamalpreet Kaur's performance at Tokyo. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Welcome, Vikas sir, to the Gifted Podcast Olympic Special Series. We're really excited to have you today. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really excited to be here too.
Perfect. So I know your father coached the Indian track and field team at the 1988 Olympics. So you being drawn to athletics is understandable. But what about discus throw really resonated with you?
You know, when I was a kid, I started out as a long jumper, just jumping events. And as I got older, I started to grow more, and I kind of outgrew the jumping events. So I just was just trying different things out, and I liked throwing the shot put and discus in high school. And as I got better, my interest in it grew more and more. I was always active. I was always competing in something. So that's just kind of how I naturally progressed into the throwing events.
Right. And you grew up in Maryland, USA. What sort of influence has competing in the US had on you while growing up?
They just have a very different system, and I think it's a good system in terms of producing top level athletes, because even competing at the high school level, you have to be really good. And then moving up to the collegiate level, some of the collegiate athletes are already the best in the world. And so you're always surrounded by top level talent in any event. So that atmosphere always pushes you, and you can't just kind of relax and not train hard, and because there's always someone out there that's really good.
Right. And while you were growing up in US and competing in various different track and field events, you also dabbled in shot put. Why did you decide to then, gradually start focusing only on discus rather than shot put?
I think most throwers in high school and college, they'll do multiple events, but I think maintaining that level in more than one event at the Olympic level is very rare. You don't see very many people doing the shot put and discus, so you kind of have to pick, and sometimes the event picks you, because even if you do both the shot put and discus, you're usually better in one, and you kind of just go towards whatever you're better at.
Right. And like you mentioned, the sport picks you, the discipline picks you. What about discus do you think worked well in your favor physiologically or mentally as well?
The discus, I'm really tall, so having long levers definitely, and I've always had a natural feel for it. That's something that is hard to teach. I mean, some people can just pick up a shot put and they just know what to do with it. Some people can pick up a javelin and it just feels right. The throwing motion is just very natural. So that's kind of how it was for me in the discus.
And you went to your first Olympics in 2004 at the age of 21. What was your experience like at it?
That was an insane experience for me, just because I never competed outside of the U.S. That was my first. I threw at the World Juniors in 2002 in Jamaica, but then my next international competition was at the 2004 Olympics. So that was a huge transition and learning experience for me. So it definitely helped me develop and kind of gave me an idea of what the global Olympic level looks like.
Yeah. And you ended up performing pretty well since it was your Olympic debut. But how difficult is it to not get overawed by the occasion and continue focusing on the performance?
You just kind of think back of all the training you've done That's really what kind of grounds, and you try to replicate what you're doing in training. Even if you're at an Olympic stadium with 100,000 people there, you usually tend to revert back to what you have done in practice the most. If you're training well, even if you're at the Olympic level, you can kind of revert back to what you've been doing in training the most. If you're not training well, then that's what's going to happen in at that level.
Right. And what would you say was your biggest learning from Athens that you took to the Beijing Olympics?
Just being around other top level throwers was a huge learning experience, because at that time, that year was the first year I threw over 60 meters, and I'd never really seen someone throw like in person over 62 or 63 meters. I think that year I went on to throw 64, 30, something like that. So just being exposed to that high level talent, and okay, wow, there's so many really good guys out there. But at the same time, I think I just turned 21 right before that Olympics, and I got 14th, I think. So I knew I was getting to the level I wanted to, but I also realized I had a lot more work and more that I needed to achieve.
Right. And what would you say was your experience at Beijing? Because I know that, there were some interruptions going into Beijing with, some couple of niggling injuries and then not being able to take your coach there.
Beijing was also a different experience just because I was out of college at that point. I was training full time, and I was kind of just training on my own. There wasn't really the infrastructure set up at that time where after you graduate college, you can go and train with this group or that group. That happened later, like recently that's happening, where even if you're in Australia, you can go train. There's established coaches here, and there. So I was just kind of training on my own, just trying to figure out on my own. So things weren't really going well. I just didn't know what was going on. And then the next Olympics, I found my coach, John Godina, at that point, and really he helped me kind of get to that next level.
And, like you mentioned, it was after Beijing when you made some changes to your training regime, moving cities, focusing on, joining a throwing center specifically. And that's when you started seeing, reaping rewards for your training. And London came at a very good time. You went in as a real contender. And you produced the best throw from your group to qualify automatically. What was going through your mind going into the final?
For me, I just kept executing, just kind of worry about what I'm doing, don't really focus on like the stadium, other throwers. And I was the first thrower in the final. So I think my best throw of that competition was the first throw. So I just wanted to make sure in the final, you can't really I'm just going to throttle back and throw it 80% and hope to make the final, because that's not going to happen. You have to be at your best from the first throw. So I think, that was one of my best competitions ever. So even now when I look back on that, I'm proud of that. I think in terms of discus, it's going to be hard to replicate that level of competition, just because the top three guys, the first, Robert Hardy, he was an Olympic champion, one of the best throwers ever. Gert Kanner was third in that competition. He was Olympic champion. Lechner was there at fourth. He won 2 Olympic championships. So out of the top 4, there were 4 Olympic medals, gold medals there. So, and several other world champions and more championship medals. So I think that competition just to make the final was the farthest throw ever, just to make the final. So just looking back on that, I just feel proud of that.
Right. And I'd love to go deeper into, the point that you made where mentally the way you approach a qualifier round versus a finals round, what sort of a switch needs to happen across these two events?
For me, I didn't really approach it differently. I just try to go out there and throw the best on every single throw. It's hard to go into that competition. You have so much adrenaline, and if you try to fight that adrenaline by not going at your full potential, it's kind of, for me, I think that would mess my rhythm up. You've put in a lot of work. You're going into that stadium with a ton of energy. You kind of have to let that energy work with you instead of against it, So I always approach the qualifying and final in a similar mental mindset.
Right. And you ended up finishing 8th in the finals. So within the finals as well, there are finals happening again. and you finished eighth in that. How did you rate your performance, and what would you say was your biggest learning from, competing in that finals? Like you mentioned, it'll be difficult to replicate that kind of a competition again in the Olympics.
I mean, that final just really gave me a lot of confidence. That was the first time after trying a couple of times that I made the Olympic final. The previous, in 2010, I got second at Commonwealth Games. In 2011, I got seventh at World Championships. So I was kind of building and finally starting to see and reach the potential that I always thought I had. So that just gave me a lot of confidence. And just looking back now, I was 29 at the 2012 Olympics, and I kind of, after I graduated college, I kind of spent 3 or 4 years just kind of like not really being as productive as I could have been if I was in a different training situation. So I always look back now and think like, oh, if I had a similar training situation right after college or even during college, what things would look at. But I mean, those are things that everyone just naturally thinks back on. Like looking back on it now, there's so many things I would have done differently and things like that.
Got it. And, then for Rio, you battled injuries to qualify. How did you approach Rio knowing that, now you could be considered a legend, a veteran going into your fourth Olympics? What sort of goals were you setting for yourself heading into Rio?
Yeah, after 2015, my body just kind of started falling apart. Every year. I mean, during the Olympics, most athletes they're in really good shape, but their body is also kind of hanging on by a string. There's just so much training. You're pushing your body so hard for so long. Yeah. Most athletes aren't at their maximum in terms of health when they're at the Olympics, but they are at their physical peak. So when you're pushing your body that much for that long period of time, I just had so many injuries at that point after 2015 things weren't really starting off great. In the fall training and the winter training, my knees and back weren't letting me train at all. So, it was just really frustrating because that's not how I wanted to go out there and compete. I've never competed like that. And I had surgery, I think like 5 or 6 weeks before Rio. But even with that, the practice right before I left Rio was really good. So I was like, okay, I think I can put something together. Maybe I can get a couple good training sessions in Rio, and then kind of work it out like that. But it just didn't work out like that, and that's just how things go sometimes, and that's just the nature of sports.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, you had to go through surgery just a few weeks before Rio, and that often interrupts the training, the physical training at least. And we often hear that athletes end up leaning on mental side of training, trying to visualize their throws heading into the Olympics. Would you say that you also resorted to that, or you were more of, somebody who'd get to the field and, feel your way and get the best throw?
Yeah, definitely visualization is a big part of it because you can really feel what's actually happening. Your body can actually sense it. It's hard to tell the difference, and it saves your body from the wear and tear, So that's definitely an important factor, and I think most athletes do use that.
Got it. And knowing the injury barriers that you had to overcome to get to Rio, what does it mean to you to have a Zindagi Unlimited, which we try to say is a life without limitations? Trying to overcome the barriers that you have faced, trying to chase down the dreams that you've had.
It is a good feeling knowing that if you were kind of in control of your life. Like if you want to achieve something and you set forth a plan, and every day you kind of work to achieve that plan, you're going to put yourself in a really good position to achieve your goals and win and things like that. The life sometimes isn't fair, and even if you do all the right things, you don't end up winning on that occasion. But if you don't put in the work and you don't make the right choices, you're not putting yourself in a position to win or achieve what you want. So it's the little things that you do every day that can really set you up for the future.
Yeah, and I think children growing up playing sports would be at an advantage because they are facing these kinds of things. When we say life is unfair, we also know that sports is unfair at times, and they'd be in a better position to have these life skills into them as they are growing up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can make in life there's those small decisions you make every day, and then there's the big decisions you make every once in a while. So you gotta make good decisions every single day just to kind of give yourself a chance, because everything is so competitive these days, especially now. Like, you see the performances in Tokyo, some of these events are performing so high, and to give yourself a chance to compete, you have to do things right every
Yeah.
single day. And I mean, and every day you're not going to perform and train at the level that you want to, but in order to give yourself a real chance in the future, you have to go be in it every single day.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's very evident by the way that records are being shattered at Tokyo, not by a small margin, but by like a very big margin, especially in track and field events.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was watching the men's shot put last night. So, I mean, Ryan threw 23:30. So, if you want to compete with him, you can't really not train and make the right decisions every single day. Like, he's out there, he's the best in the world by far, and he's training
Yeah.
hard and doing the little things right every single day. So, someone at a lower level, they have to do the same thing.
Yeah. And coming to Tokyo performance for Kamalpreet, especially in your event of discus throw, what have you made of her performance so far?
She threw really well at the Olympic level. So I think she threw over 66 meters before,
Yeah.
and she threw 64 in the qualifying, and then 63 high in the final, and got sixth, I think. So that's
Yeah.
awesome. I always really like when people, especially in the discus, they can, whatever their PR is or personal best is, if they can hit close to that at the Olympics, that in and of itself is a huge accomplishment, because being at your best at the biggest level is huge. I mean, that's
Yeah.
rare. Even for people that win the Olympic gold medal, sometimes they're not even close to their best, But
Right.
so that's another accomplishment in and of itself, just being close to your personal best, because you're competing with the other competitors, and at the same time you're competing with yourself, and
Yeah.
she's really young, so she's got many more years, and if she just kind of focuses on that, I think that'll help her.
Right. And she finished sixth, which is joint highest for any Indian field athlete at the Olympics. And she's, like you pointed out, she's also pretty young. She's 25, and most likely you'd be seeing her at Paris as well. If you were her coach at Tokyo Olympics when she was getting into the finals, what sort of advice would you have given her?
I mean, I think for anybody, just in the discus especially, you just have to relax, use the energy that the Olympics gives you naturally. Like, when you step into that stadium, even if there's no one there, you're at the Olympics, all that adrenaline is going to be there, and try to use that, and think about how the things that you're doing in training that help you throw far. Just focus on a couple things. Don't overthink it. Don't try to muscle the throw. Try to relax and use that adrenaline that you have just from being at the Olympics.
And in terms of, the Indian sports ecosystem, what do you think needs to change or improve to produce more discus throwers as well as overall track and field athletes?
I mean, that's tough, because that's $1 million question. Everyone's always wondering that. I think just kind of starting young and developing athletes at an early age, not necessarily in competing, but just kind of being like, I think I was watching a documentary, and they were talking about how, like, the Nordic countries, they don't really compete until they're at the high school level, but they're all very active and participating in something. They don't really make the kids compete young. They just want to make sure they're having fun, they're enjoying and moving around, but by not making them compete, they're still participating and learning how to move.
Yeah.
So they maintain a lot of athletes at the high school level, instead of, like, in tennis, like, they'll play tennis from they're like 7 years old, and by the time they get to high school, most of them are burnt out, so they don't
Yeah.
maintain the numbers. And in some of those countries, like in the Nordic countries, they maintain a lot of athletes into high school. And the longer that they stay in sports, the better
Yeah.
chances they have. So I think just being active, and participating in sports from an early age, not necessarily competing and having that pressure on a kid, will help them develop and really appreciate the sport, really understand why they're competing, because we're out there to have fun, to compete, and just build our mental strength like that, you know. So I think if you start at an early age and just teach them that sports is about, like, you know, moving around, realizing what your body is capable of, and then as you get older, we can start competing and developing from there.
Right. That's pretty insightful, actually, and I haven't had, you know, that kind of a perspective. So thank you for sharing that. And, you know, thank you so much for taking all the time today to, you know, share your journey with us.
No, yeah, I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Okay. Thank you so much once again, Vikas. Yeah, have a good day ahead.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You too.
Yeah. Well, as always, it's intriguing to pick the elite athletes' brains on how the sport could be advanced in our country. Vikas made some interesting remarks that will definitely be food for thought for a lot of us. But one thing is certain. Athletes like Vikas and Kamalpreet are paving the way for many more track and field athletes to rise from India and compete at the Olympics. On that note, let's look at some interesting updates from Tokyo so far. The men's hockey team had their work cut out as they faced a strong German side in the bronze medal match. The match did not disappoint at all. No matter if you're an India fan or just a neutral. The roller coaster encounter ended with India running out 5-4 winners and securing the first hockey medal at the Olympics in more than 40 years. India's women's hockey team was also in medal contention as they faced off with Great Britain in the bronze medal match. This game, much like men's bronze medal match, was a roller coaster with a lot of fast-paced action and goals flooding the game. But India's women's team had a very difficult fourth quarter as they ended up losing the clash 4-3 and having to settle for the most cruel position at the Olympics, fourth. Neeraj Chopra earned direct qualification into the finals with a massive throw of 86.65 meters that put him at the top of the charts across both the groups. With a throw like that, he certainly becomes the man to beat in the finals and could potentially end a century-long wait for an Olympic medal in track and field events for India. Ravi Kumar in the semi-finals had a historic comeback victory as he came back from being 2-9 down and achieving the victory by fall and advancing to the finals. He entered the finals full of confidence and held his own against the formidable Zavur Uguev. While the bout was tense initially, Uguev was far superior and put on a masterclass for all the wrestlers out there. This meant Ravi had to settle for a silver medal, which is India's 5th medal at the Tokyo Games. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Gifted Podcast Olympic Special Series. With Neeraj Chopra in athletics, Aditi Ashok in golf, and Bajrang Punia in wrestling all fighting for medals, let's continue cheering Team India on. Until next time, I'm your host Neeraj Mulani signing off.